One of the things that's come to our attention is that it's important for us to share information about the curriculum that we teach here at Bornblum. So I'm joined today by Jill Cross, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and we're going to dive deep into our math curriculum. How you doing, Jill?
Hi, good morning.
So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how our curriculum is aligned with the standards and current best practices of math education.
Yeah, so when we're working on our curriculum maps, we are aligning to the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics standards for mathematical practices. Those are kind of big umbrella goals for students, things like attending to precision, knowing how to model with math, explaining reasoning. That's kind of our starting point. And then we look at we look at state standards. In Tennessee, we look at state standards from other places that I know have high quality standards. We look at what other independent schools are doing locally and across the nation, and then kind of use all that information to develop our own curriculum map that makes sense for our context and our students. And then we're looking at that across grade levels. We're looking to make sure that the scope and sequence makes sense, that we're building on ideas in an order that makes sense for students, that there aren't any gaps or overlaps in what our students need to know and be able to do when it comes to math. And all the time we're reflecting and refining it. And so we're constantly looking at our maps, at our units of study, to ensure that they make sense. To, if at the end of the year we look at something and say, okay, well, maybe this unit needs to be moved around so that it makes more sense conceptually for students, then we're doing that all the time. So what I appreciate about it is that we have a lot of autonomy and freedom to make our math curriculum make sense for us.
But it's data driven, and
yes,
you're
absolutely.
really an expert on cultivating that data, not just internally, but finding out from your network, because you have quite the extensive network, to learn more about what they're doing and what's successful. How do you use that information to help us design what we're doing here?
Yeah, so we use a lot of different data points to work with our students. We're using formative assessment data. That's like the daily anecdotal information that we're getting from students, maybe a small quick check, a quiz. We're looking at that. We're also looking at more of our summative assessment data, so end of unit assessments, or we're using IXL. We use MAP at the beginning and end of the year, which is aligned to national standards and really helps us to pinpoint and understand what it is that each student needs to work on. Our teachers look at all of that information and they set specific goals for students. And so if we're looking at MAP data and we see that a student needs some support in number sense, then that is a specific goal the teacher's working on with the student when they're differentiating instruction. They're kind of keeping it in the back of their mind while they're teaching, so that if they see a moment to kind of capitalize on that with a student, they're able to do that. And so we're looking at that all throughout the year. I'm a data nerd, and I love looking at the data. I could spend forever looking at all the data. But I think the important thing is that we're not just looking at the data, we're really using it to inform our instruction.
So speaking of instruction, how would you explain a typical math lesson in a lower school compared to upper elementary and then middle school?
Right. So the format, we have a really well-defined math block because we want to make sure that we provide time for introduction of new material, but also for small group instruction, for differentiation, and for that assessment piece, as well as some fluency practice. And so a typical lesson looks like the teacher introducing new concepts, new ideas with any of our curriculum materials or something they've created on their own. That mini lesson is about 10 to 12 minutes of instruction of that new concept. In the moment, they're quickly kind of assessing and seeing, kind of getting a pulse of the class, like who needs what, who's getting this, and who maybe needs a little extra reteach today. And so then the next part of the block is that reteach. It's independent practice, it's small group work. They might be doing, the kids that are ready to kind of roll with a new concept or doing some independent work. They might be doing something that's like a little higher level, that's kind of pushing their thinking a little further. And then maybe the teacher's working with a small group and so that's like the middle part of the block. At the end of the block is kind of a closure of sort of recap, reflection on the student's understanding And then we also have within our structure one day that we sort of dedicate as kind of like a lot of our classes call it Fluency Friday. It could be any day of the week, where the kids are doing games. They're doing, activities that help them to get to access their understanding quickly. It's important that our kids are not just learning to memorize and do rote memorization of math facts, because that only takes them so far if they don't understand the concepts. And so that's also part of Fluency Friday. Like, not only are they learning to kind of quickly have that automaticity to be able to work through math problems quickly, but to understand what that really means, how numbers work. And so that structure is pretty much the same in K-5. In middle school, it looks a little similar in that the kids are, they might have a bell work activity, some sort of activity that starts the lesson off, kind of helps them to activate some prior knowledge, and then a new skill is introduced. The practice piece, there's still differentiation happening. There's a lot of conversation happening, and really across all of our grades, there's a lot of conversation about math happening, because it's important for kids to explain their thinking and to hear others explain their thinking and know that there's not always one way to solve a math problem. And so in middle school, there's a lot of that collaboration. There's a lot of that discussion. The teacher circulating the room, making sure that students understand, they're getting independent practice work. And so that's typically what a math lesson looks like. I mean, of course, they're different every day. And if the students are working on something that maybe is more problem-based, the structure might look a little different, depending on the activity. But that's generally what it is.
And you talked a little bit about how things are differentiated in the class. That's when the kids are at a similar ability level. What do we do in terms of when those opportunities arise, or when we have those students who their ability is different than everybody else in the classroom?
Right. So yeah, we're always looking at all of that anecdotal data, all of that assessment data, and the in-class work that students are doing to determine if they're ready to be pushed. We want to make sure that we're challenging kids at a level that's appropriate for them. And so in K-1, that's a lot of in-class activities that kids are working on with the teacher.
And is that because K-1 is so skill-based that they need those basic pieces of learning before they can move on?
Right. It's really important that the kids have a strong foundation in number sense early on. And so the balance is always making sure that we're not pushing kids before they have that strong foundation. And so in K-1, a lot of that's done in class. The teachers are differentiating. They're giving kids different tasks. They might be, first grade just did an activity where they designed a zoo. And so they're practicing addition and subtraction skills, but that they might have learned kind of with the rest of the class, but then they're taking it to a different level with an activity that's a little more project-based. And then in about second grade, we start looking at whether or not students should be in an enrichment class that's actually a pullout. That is a different teacher of record. And
so they're not in the classroom with everybody else, but it's a separate class happening simultaneously.
Right. And so those classes are a mix of activities that are at a deeper level, different project and problem-based activities, but also they're moving a little quicker than their peers that are in the classroom. And so typically we get them to about a full grade ahead once they start kind of moving into that enrichment.
And sometimes even further than that.
For sure. Yeah. And so if they're working ahead a grade, then that kind of puts them on a trajectory to, our guaranteed kind of 8th grade classes, Algebra 1. If they're in an enrichment model, then they're going to probably get geometry as an 8th grader, which then puts them in a different bracket for high school level math. Allows them to take those higher level AP classes like AP Calc or even statistics in 11th and 12th grade, which, some majors and colleges want to see on a transcript. We've also had instances where students are even further beyond that. We've had students that finish in Algebra 2 as 8th graders. We're always trying to figure out how to meet the need.
If we have a student who hasn't been identified in 2nd grade or even in 3rd grade of needing this math enrichment, Does that mean that there's no chance for them to move into a math enrichment later on in their career here at the school?
No, for sure not. We're always looking at it. It's very flexible. It's very fluid. And we, we've had kids move into enrichment, maybe third, fourth grade. Then the enrichment teacher is working with that student to get them to a place where they're with the rest of that enrichment group. And so we're always kind of adjusting instruction based on students. There isn't really such a thing as a math brain like a lot of people think.
I definitely don't have one.
Right? All of us can be good at math, and some of us take it's a different timetable, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes us a little bit longer to get to have those foundational understandings, and especially the abstract thinking that's needed for an enrichment class. And so when kids are ready for that, we're ready to meet them where they are.
I was sitting with a student the other day, and they were doing a math problem, and the way that they came up with the solution was not at all how the book was suggesting that they
Right.
came up with the solution, but they came up with the right answer. So I think that's great that we're giving the kids the time and space and ability to work in different ways and still come up with the right answer.
Yeah.
How long is our math period, our math block on a given day?
So
and how does that compare to other schools?
Right. So we do an hour math block in K through 5. And once again, that math block is different. We've got different components of that math block. So it's not like they're sitting there and listening to someone.
It's not a math
direct
lecture
instruction.
for now, yeah.
Right. And then in middle school, it's about 50 minutes, which is all of that puts us kind of on par with what other schools are doing, I would say. And then we're also really great at interdisciplinary learning here. So there's a ton of opportunity for, math is integrated across the day in a lot of other subjects and in design thinking. And so, when the kids are learning Lightburn and Tinkercad, and that's all mathematical and spatial reasoning. And so, it's happening across the day.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, I definitely saw it just this week when the kids were working on their Dreidel challenge
Right.
in middle school, how much math they needed to put into place. I saw Mr. Sharabi working with a student and trying to figure out how to move something like less than a millimeter
Yeah.
and how to figure out the fractions on being able to do that. So
Yeah.
math is definitely
Right.
coming in different ways. How do we, as a school, support our teachers in their continuing learning so that way they're pushing the envelope and giving the kids what they need?
Right. So professional development is really important to us here. And so we do put a lot of time and effort and into that. And we do that a few different ways. So we've, in the last few years, worked with a math consultant, Naomi Church from Growing Minds, who actually worked with us on both our a greater definition within our math block, working with our teachers on activities that can be used for differentiation for those Fluency Fridays, helping our teachers understand kind of the trajectory from concrete to representational to abstract and how that works in the classroom, using manipulatives and then drawing out visuals and then understanding how all that works with numbers. And so she's done a lot of work with us. We also invest a lot in individual coaching. And so we work with another consultant that I know that works with our teachers individually. And she meets with them for, 45 minutes every week, every other week, helping them to troubleshoot things that are happening in the class. Maybe they've seen some misconceptions occur with students. How can we remediate that? She's also helping them on making sure that there's a lot of focus, instructional coherence and focus, and what it is that we're doing in the classroom, so that the lessons and the assessment are really directly tied to the objectives and the standards that we want to teach. And so that has been hugely beneficial. We also are always constantly meeting as a team, grade banded teams as a whole faculty to kind of look at our scope and sequence, to talk about what the transitions look like between different grades. So there's a lot of in-house coaching and collaboration that's happening as well.
We talked a lot about enrichment and identifying kids that need that grade level above support. What about kids who, we talk a lot, and we'll have another one of these series where we'll talk about ELA and our English curriculum and about kids who might need extra help with their reading. What about kids who need extra help with their math? What about dysgraphia and things along those lines? How do those play in?
Yeah, so we're working on that with teachers, and teachers are working on with students in class on a lot of that, and they're using a lot of that assessment data to pinpoint where the misunderstanding is occurring. It's happening in small groups. It's happening in one-on-one work. That's happening within that math block. So we want to make sure that our kids are, as much as possible, making their thinking visible. And so that might mean in discussions, like discussing their thinking and how they're working through a problem. It could also mean on paper, because all of that helps us to pinpoint what it is that the student actually needs. So the teachers are working on that in class all the time. They're meeting with me constantly, and so we're talking about, like, okay, this student seems to be struggling with one-to-one correspondence. Let's say, what are some things some strategies that we can do related to that?
So I see kids sometimes using graph paper. They're not making graphs. How does that graph paper help students?
I highly recommend graph paper for math for every single grade, for just even simple algorithms, right? It helps us to keep our thinking straight. It's very easy to get for numbers to get lost when you're working out math problems. And so the graph paper really helps. And for students that, not just for students that have dyscalculia or dysgraphia, that for students that, for every student, I think it's highly beneficial to use a graph paper. So we've really been pushing the use of graph paper just to help kids to organize their thinking better.
Yeah, I find that a lot, that some of the modifications that we might want to give to one or two students, we recognize that those can be beneficial for every student, so why not do it for everybody? Right. Anything else you want to share with us about our math curriculum and its design?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's really important in the way that we're doing math is that we're always looking at the depth of knowledge, the depth of understanding, right? And so, we want to take kids not just from understanding how to add and subtract within 100, let's say, but how to explain the relationship between addition and subtraction, which is like the level 4, right? It's the strategic thinking and the extended thinking that we really want to push kids to. Like when I was not a math person growing up at all. And I did not really start to understand math until I started teaching 5th grade math. Because
what clicked at that point?
I was having to explain my thinking all of a sudden and explain, we know that reciprocal teaching, that teaching others something is such a high impact. And so I think that's a real hallmark of us and kind of a highlight of our classrooms is that our kids are in that point where they're able to explain their thinking to teach others, because that's going to take them to that extended thinking, that deeper understanding. And I mean, we're always trying to learn and grow and listening to podcasts and participating in webinars.
And sending our teachers to professional development opportunities.
Right. Yeah. So.
Well, that's great. I appreciate learning a little bit more about our math curriculum. I hope that everybody who is watching has a chance to learn a little bit more about how we teach math, what our expectations for our students are, how we support our teachers, and how we're growing this math curriculum together. And in coming videos, we're going to explore some of the other key elements of our general studies curriculum. We'll talk about ELA, and we'll talk about science, and we'll talk about social studies. So that way our parents have a better understanding of how we've designed the curriculum that we have and how beneficial it is to each and every one of our students.
Yeah.
So thank you for taking some time.
Yeah,
I enjoyed my cup of coffee. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes. Yes.